first introduce myself and then Joshua. I am Camm Rowland. I am the Chief Creative Officer at Kepler, Kepler Group, which is a full funnel digital media agency located here in New York and around the world. I'm joined by Joshua Nafman, who is the VP of Data at Diageo, and he spends his time making every experience at Diageo and with Diageo experiences with their customers better using data. So I want to start with just a general question. Tell us a little bit more about what that means, making all of the experiences better with data.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So when we say make every experience, when we're talking about experience, it's consumer experience is one, customer experience. So in my case, CPG, it's I sell to people. And then also, don't want to forget about people within Diageo, so internal employees or contractors. How do we make all of these things more seamless? Everybody deserves a more seamless experience. That's number one. When we say better, how am I improving ROI and how am I making sure the different moving cogs and pieces and plans are working together rather than in silos? Every single corporation is going to run into challenges of that. And then when we talk about data, I'm talking about our consumer data, our customer data, and also, I would say, second-party data. And finally, I'm starting to pull in supply chain data. And the reason why is because, again, operating outside of those silos, how do these things affect each other and influence each other rather than just in the silo of one point of view? And then from a remit standpoint, how am I improving ROI? How am I making sure things are working together? And then how do I build a data community, essentially, which is all the people that are focused on data, and Diageo, that's a lot of people. How do we make sure they're aware of each other so we're not, everybody says test and learn. There's a lot of retesting and relearning. Let's stop that.
How is AI starting to impact all those different aspects?
So from an AI standpoint, I would say I can go into the nerdy side of things and I can go into the general side of things. There's other people besides myself focused on, I would say, the generative AI parts of it. I like to say I focus on the boring parts of AI. I find it incredibly interesting, but it's more of the behind the scenes things. So think about how data is being harmonized so that it's not just one of those point of views. So I'll give you a tangible example. How is my consumer and commercial data being mixed together? Then how am I using that in a very granular level to then target consumers with zip codes with a higher propensity to purchase premium products? So say they're purchasing right now Smirnoff and I want to upsell them towards Kettle One as an example. How do I make sure that the data is organized in the way and applied in the way and sent out to various media platforms for the purposes of driving those things? So what data points do I want, and then adjusting accordingly. So that's one example of AI, how it's impacting. Another one is we have, I think it's right now 400,000 pieces of creative from this year alone. And then also Diageo's been around for a while. Some of our brands are hundreds of years old. So we have a very large bank of creative. What creative's working? What creative's being used? What creative's not being used? And how do we use all of those facts to influence where we're having wastage, where we can reuse things? The bottles don't change that often. The occasions and the celebrations that people have don't change that often. So how can we be smarter rather than just feeding all of our addictions to content and things like that?
So you've got all of this content, you've got all this data. He's been in plenty of meetings where they've seen giant, eye charts of data. How do you help tell the story of the data in a way that compels sort of meaningful action? Like, this is what we're seeing, and extracting insights from that and saying, this is the recommendation of what we should do.
So I like to say that I've never found a dashboard that I'm really excited about logging into. People don't log into dashboards. We produce a lot of them and it's overwhelming and it never answers your question. It just is there for, hey, can I export this, put it into Excel, and then actually find my own answer? So number one is it's not about data holistically. It's about what's that 1 or 2 points of data that we're actually looking for, and then you focus in on that. On the flip side of the story is when I'm communicating to an executive or anybody else is using metaphors to make it more relatable. So let me bring this to life. rather than having an entire dashboard on here is how all of our creative across the entire company over the past 5 years is performing down to ROI. I have a wonderful dashboard that does that. Nobody logs in. I'm pretty much the only one. Now, if in a presentation or when I'm talking about it, if I go, we have 400,000 pieces of content. We did an analysis of those, and about 50 of them are truly unique in comparison to every other one. So therefore, let's set those aside and go, how can we, this is how many are working really well for us. So that's another way that we can have in a presentation or cut through from a story standpoint. The way that I actually talk is more along the lines of, imagine there is a box in your attic filled with pictures. Some of them you labeled, some of them your spouse labeled, and you're looking to find a few pictures so you can reprint them. You're not going to understand the points of references. Now, I can talk about that as, oh, naming conventions and taxonomical and all this other stuff. But when I say here's a solve for it, when it comes to AI, I go, AI is going to scan all of the pictures rather than trying to understand what you or your spouse labeled things as. It's going to scan the pictures and it's going to make assumptions on this is what I think you're looking for. And it's going to move through it in a second rather than you sorting through one by one. So I try to make it into a more relatable metaphor rather than just the cold hard facts of the data itself.
So my background being in creative, I'm more of a visual learner, and I'm always surprised by dashboards and large volumes of data that don't reference the content, right? So you're saying like, here's the content that worked, here's the content that didn't. Sometimes those are just campaign names and things like that. And I always find that it's interesting to say, okay, wouldn't it be really helpful to be layering in a level of sort of human intuition and saying, these are the ones that worked well, these are the ones that didn't, and looking at the actual creative as part of the storytelling, because I think there's an aspect of just human intuition that's like, I can feel why those worked better. I can feel why that was connecting better. And in your talking through data and trying to make them actionable, do you get to bring the content in? I'm just always surprised that, dashboards, it's like, it's all numbers, but what we're trying to do, generally speaking, is make content more effective.
So it's a real problem that we run into, and I'm not going to say that we're perfect across the board on it. Sometimes we'll have the data conversation where we're talking around the thing that we're talking about. We need to do a better job of talking about the specific topic and making it more tangible. So the vast majority of the time people will go, oh, I agree with you, and great analysis. And then on the other side of it, it goes, I understood about maybe 5% of what you were talking about, and I'm just going to trust you. And so how do we bring the tangibility of things? So 9 times out of 10, it's going, here's the impact, and putting it into human terms rather than the data terms. But first, I need to know what the data terms are.
Yeah, absolutely. Switching gears into some privacy, not the most exciting topic, but personalization, right? So AI is unlocking incredible sort of capabilities for personalization, and people now are having increasing expectation around privacy, of course, but they're also having increasing expectations around personalization, and those two things seem to run sort of in conflict with each other in many regards. How do we find the sweet spot where we're offering total private, privacy of their data and information, and giving them really personalized experiences as well?
I think it's both easy and easier said than done. The reason why I think that way is, first and foremost, we require consumer consent. We're all looking for, in some way, shape, or form, loopholes, or how can I play around with this? It's a really basic idea of, hey, we have permission, and if they retract that permission, we don't do things. And so we're always looking for loopholes around these things. So when it comes to privacy, consent really just needs to be table stakes requirement, not just from a legal standpoint, from ethical. Nobody likes feeling creeped out by what happens in marketing. So that's number one. On the other side of things, in terms of the personalization, I think a lot of the problem is solved by actually providing value. And I think that there needs to be more of a debate around, is value to a consumer, you get more of my ads? Is value to my consumer, you get more of my emails? I feel like we're kidding ourselves when we talk about that as an actual value exchange. There needs to be something that is more than just you get more of me when they might be looking for something more tactical. So how do we understand what their needs actually are versus what we are? A lot of marketers right now are saying, I'm consumer centric. They're full of shit. It's in reality, it's if you're actually consumer centric, you wouldn't be doing the vast majority of things that you're doing. So how do we take a step back and actually provide that value exchange and go, what are they looking for? Whether it's entertainment or just information of the product, how do we make those things easy? They will reward us when we respect that.
When I think about my data and I think about the brands that have access to it, to me it's really interesting because there's certain brands I would say, I want you to know very little about me. And there's other brands or entities, healthcare providers and so on. Like there's a lot of different tiers of different kinds of entities that could have access to your data. And I'm wondering this idea of how you can kind of control that when you can opt in, right? I might want Starbucks to know a couple things, but I might want my healthcare provider to know a lot. I might want Amazon to know something sort of in between. And I'm wondering if we are going to see the emergence of sort of data brokerages that are going to say, this is theoretical, but it seems to me like there's an opportunity for somebody, some entity that is really truly trusted with data to say, you get to opt in, say it's like level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, like the level of data you want to have, allow people to have access to. And so they can really deeply personalize something to you. You're going on a cruise, for example, and you're like, I want them to know everything, right? I want them to know dietary preferences. I want them to know all these different things. Do you think that there's a possibility that that kind of thing will emerge where consumers are really in control of how their data gets used?
I don't.
You don't think that's possible?
I don't think it's possible. I think the vast majority of people just click accept or they just click reject and they don't really want to think about it because they don't understand why it's worth thinking about. And I think that there's a increasing amount of people that are aware and kind of want to adjust accordingly. But the vast majority of people, like I'm a very privacy focused person. I want to do that. Sometimes I just want to get the banner out of my view. And I work on what those banners are, no matter the wording, no matter whether or not it's legalese or whether or not it's in English. We have to recognize that some people are going to want to put in the effort, some people aren't. We offer the flexibility, but ultimately it's going to be at the discretion. There is a certain amount of personal responsibility. Now, we have to respect that, in my opinion, we have to respect it when somebody says, I don't want to be associated with this. We shouldn't be looking for loopholes or here's the ways that I can do the thing. You still need the value exchange. You still need the transparency and the honesty of it.
So you're thinking it's a bit more all or none. Like I either accept or I don't, but it wouldn't be I accept but under these kind of conditions.
I think it's I accept under these conditions, but it's also how much effort are people going to go into to provide that level of information. Healthcare is one thing in comparison to I want the scores on ESPN.com.
Yeah, right, 100%. Thinking more about the customer experience and thinking about brands now and getting into generative AI, there's an interesting study that it's from the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies that says 99% of internet content will be AI generated by the year 2030, possibly as early as the year 2025. And that sounds kind of crazy, but when you think about the sort of exponential increase of content due to generative, it's not probably that outlandish to think that. So if you think of 99% of the content in the digital universe being AI generated, how do you think that's going to impact the way brands kind of connect with people and thinking about authenticity and thinking about trust?
I think overall consumers are addicted to content, whether it's algorithm or not, and AI is going to fill the gap of their content needs essentially over and over again. There's positives and some major negatives to that, in my opinion, but that's kind of the way society is operating right now. I would say on the brand side, I think brands are addicted to feeding that content engine of how can I produce more creative, how can I produce it more efficiently, and how can I spread it everywhere all at once. I would say I'm hoping brands will start realizing that quantity does not equal quality, and it's going to be more focused on the how do you actually cut through and kidding yourself on what actual cut through is. Probably the vast majority of brands are looking for how can I put something out there that is good enough and rather than excellent. And so I'm hoping that our industry kind of leans more towards the quality and the cut through aspect of it because I would say AI is going to be summarizing all of these things, and it's going to be like it's already stripping out brands and things like that. So how do we cut through that and be the answer rather than one of the options of the answers, essentially?
Summarizing it is an interesting topic as well, because as we get into, I'm sure we've all done it, expanding our ideas into longer form content, but then also daily, number of times a day, contracting and condensing that same kind of content, that long form content, down into sort of digestible pieces. So there's an interesting sort of possibility where we're creating almost like a useless economy of content, because it's taking little things. We're using AI to expand it into long form content that nobody has. So people don't have time to write the long form content because they're trying to feed the void, right? So they're making tons and tons of content, expanding it. We as consumers and viewers don't have the time to read it, so we immediately go to our AI to condense it down into its key points. So what is the point of the millions of articles and long form content pieces that are generated by AI and then recondensed for AI, and are they just sort of an unnecessary intermediary step in getting information? And you think about too, just the ability to sort of real time now, if you have a question, you don't need to go look for an article that speaks to that answer. You can get the article written for you in real time by something like Perplexity, for example, and it cites all the sources. So it's kind of like having a blog post writer who's doing the research for you and writing the blog post for you. So I'm curious your take on just content in general, when we're in a sort of content economy of we use AI to make it and then we use AI to simplify it down for us.
I don't find a ton of value in the feeding the void of content and using AI to do it, just because it is that dynamic. So I'm not sure whether or not it's a useful, it's a good use of our time. It's funny, you got into a interesting aspect of it around I would say personalization. A lot of brands are talking about how we need to provide personalized experiences. In a couple of weeks, essentially, or months, or whatever it is, everybody's gonna sleep next to their phone, and there's gonna be an AI personal assistant that is going to personalize for you. This keeps me awake at night, and the reason why is because all of a sudden, every single one of our consumers is going to have a gatekeeper. Now, how do you influence the gatekeeper? For instance, does my consumer planning department need to start doing consumer analysis on the AIs that are available? How do you influence an LLM? I know for a fact that if I put out there Johnny Walker and I say, unless I specifically say, hey, I have Johnny Walker bottle, what should I drink tonight? It's going to respond with a category of, this is what you should drink from a whiskey standpoint. So there's going to be a lot of fundamental changes. And I feel like a lot of marketers are focused on how am I using AI in order to market, rather than thinking of everybody's going to have an AI in their pocket that is going to personalize to them. I think the dynamic is going to change. We're not going to have to personalize. We're going to have to offer options of personalization, and the AI is going to choose which one it wants. So to give an example, and I heard this on a podcast recently, which is at some point you're going to be able to go, I would like to hear the news in the style of a certain celebrity's voice from the point of view of the BBC. And then that is going to be produced in real time, and that is going to be your podcast or your article, et cetera. And so then it goes, cool, well, how does a brand cut through in those things, influence those things? It's not going to be as, I would say, the science that SEO is now. It's also not going to be the art that is going to be understanding our consumers and consumer insights. So not to give you all an existential crisis, but that's something that's happening in a couple of weeks, and we're all focused on what are we doing rather than what is coming our way. It's not how are we using AI, it's how is AI going to use us in order to personalize for their consumer.
You touched a little bit on the idea of speaking to the AI assistant, right? So let's dovetail into that for a second. The idea that we're going to have, and we're increasingly having, is with updates and things that are happening with Apple products and Amazon products, we're going to have that sort of more GPT-like sort of a personal assistant available all the time, and is probably going to be an all-knowing sort of companion that we have. And then thinking about that as if you're looking to buy many things, maybe not highly emotional purchases, maybe not a house or a very expensive watch or something like that, but just general ways that you shop. And you'll be using an AI assistant who knows everything about you and your preferences and things like that as the intermediary in many cases. We think about then brands having to actually market to imagine you have a personal shopping assistant who does all your shopping. Brands would want to speak to that personal shopping assistant as almost a higher value target in many cases than the owner of that AI assistant, right? So how is that going to change things when you're marketing? One of the things that I think, just to lead into that, is it's going to really change not only how brands have to talk, but actually what they focus on. Because if you think about the AI assistant who may be looking at, find me the best fill in the blank, hedge trimmer, batteries, whatever, it's going to be looking at things in a different way. It doesn't have a brand affinity for something because they remember the jingle from the 80s. It's going to look at it more objectively. So are brands going to have to focus energy on how to convince AIs that they're the superior product and they're what they should be recommended to?
I think that the way we market is going to have to be both emotional and functional, because there's going to be a filter of the functional, the pragmatic. Why should it be recommended? How do you get into consideration? We're woefully under aware of how decisions are made or how you get in the consideration set. For instance, do we need to start preparing our data to make it easy for an LLM to have access to? And then it goes, okay, well, how do you know whether or not you're having influence? You need to be able to test those things. So what does consumer testing or insights testing with a AI look like? On the flip side, it would be a personal assistant is going to adjust to their consumers' essentially preferences. So therefore, how do we get people to express their preferences so it becomes something that's within the consideration set? So for instance, do we become a land of, here's quizzes of which of these brands would you like to be there? And it's essentially probably through your phone, and the assistant's going to know. So therefore, if it says, my favorite is Johnny Walker, how do we get people to express those preferences so that the AI personal assistant picks up on it? And these are all things that I don't know enough about, and it gives me anxiety that I don't know all of the answers to this. When it comes to consumers, humans are incredibly complex and always will be more complex, and the ultimate goal of giving them the celebrations they're looking for and the experiences that they're looking for. How can we be helpful? I don't know the answers to a lot of those questions with regards to AI, and I think we need to switch it up of going, again, how is AI going to use us rather than how are we going to use AI? Because I think the dynamic is going to quickly change.
That's very Matrix-like and a little scary, but it makes sense. I think I want to switch now to a topic I think is top of everybody's mind, whether they're already been in the industry or they're entering in. Thinking about just the value of skill sets, right? And my personal experience of this as a creative, right, with all of the emergence of generative AI is it is an existential crisis. Me and some of my closer friends who work in the creative field sort of sit back, and sometimes when these new advancements come out, we just are like, what is being creative? What is the future of even being creative with things like Sora and just the incredible content creation capabilities? What do you think for let's start with people that are maybe entering into the industry, what are the things that you would say to somebody, what are the skill sets you really need? Because it's very different, I feel like, compared to a few years ago.
I would say there's two main focuses of advice that I've given to people. One is become an expert at asking questions, because answers are plentiful. Literally, we have access to the entire world's knowledge of human history. All the answers are there. Now, how do you get the best answer? It's by asking the best question. So it's no longer about whether or not you know things, it's whether or not you know to ask about them. Do you know what you don't know? How can you continue to explore those? How can you be curious? And the vast majority of people are looking for the answers to be given to them, and now they have to ask for them. Going further on that, I think the advice that I would give is, how can you know what you're actually looking for and be clear about it? Because in AI and just in business and just people in general also, it's we like to think that we're clear through briefs and through emails and things like that. But there's a lot of a translation layer where we make assumptions of understanding. AI doesn't make assumptions of understanding you. It takes you for what it thinks you're like. It takes it at face value. So therefore, there's going to be an incredible amount of value in being crystal clear on exactly what you want and being specific about it. The vast majority of people, especially in pretty large corporations, are generalists, are saying, hey, I'd really like to run a campaign. Okay, an AI can go and do something like that, but it's not specific enough if you have an idea of what you're looking for. So we have to think more in order to get more out of working with AI.
Yeah, two things come to mind with that in terms of the skill sets. One is in the way you're describing, I want just describing how to ask for what you want. But there's also the side of taste and having good taste, whether that's good taste in the strategic decisions or creatively just taste in the outputs, right? We're going into a place where the technical capability to execute is becoming sort of offloaded to the AI, but it draws so much more importance towards sort of softer skills, whether that's just taste and being able to curate and being able to give guidance, or it's more sort of soft skills, people skills, right? So that move away from and it could be really frustrating. Many people like myself spend many, many years mastering things that are technical, how to execute something. And now that technical execution can be offloaded, things like taste, things like people skills, things like seeing the bigger picture, thinking strategically, all of a sudden become really important. And those technical skills seem to be, if you can have a really growth mindset and you can have a really nimble mindset where you're willing to adapt or you're trying to adapt all the time and constantly learn, that combined with soft skills and being able to work really well with people and those creative intuition skills, whether that's strategic or visual sophistication, that's kind of how I would describe that sort of core of what people need. It becomes much less technical and much more, like, as you said, generalist, but a generalist with a lot of human intuition. Because when we think about, what can't AI do, you immediately go to what is the most sort of intrinsically human.
We don't have data and technology problems. We have people problems. And how well we communicate, how well we work with each other, the soft skills, the humanity of those pieces. Well, regardless of AI, we all need to work on that shit. But it's made even worse from an AI standpoint, because now you have essentially a coworker who really needs the coaching. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, how are we offering that? That means we need to be clearer. We need to be more organized. So.
I know we're on zero time. Good. We've filled.
We're on zero time. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for Brand Innovators.
Great conversation.